Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I am absolutely enthused and delighted to be joined by two of our fantastic contributors to the Axon Bulletin. Up top, we've got Declan McConville, soon to be the political correspondent of A State of Mind, and underneath we have the musical Svengali, that is JP Mason. Welcome to the show, guys. How you doing?
Just Paul, very well.
You're looking good, Dick. I'm not going to ask you where you got that done, but you are looking good, son. And there is only one story worth talking about at this moment in time, and it's obviously around the Celtic managerial. It's not even a managerial position, it's the entire footballing department being put in place, a new structure. We learned during the week, or did we learn anything during the week from Dermot Desmond's Q&A on the Celtic website? We'll start off with that, and from that I'm sure we can lead into the big story. Declan, what was your thoughts on Dermot Desmond's communication with the Celtic support?
Very much so, just the kind of usual PR stunt from the club, to bill it as an exclusive interview when there was no kind of email sent out to ask fans to contribute questions and whatnot. It wasn't any exclusive interview. I don't think it was an interview made up by the club, but with specific questions that they picked out. They tried to balance the questions a wee bit and maybe ask him a few tougher ones just so it didn't look too propaganda-ish. But it was very much so anything that you came to expect from the club. We've cried out for communication, but the right terms of communication. That was just, as the old Ronan Keating song would go, you say it best when you say nothing at all.
I can't believe that under 2 minutes into the bulletin and you've already name-checked Ronan Keating. I would hope that JP would give us far more credibility if he's going to move into the analogy of the musical world. But if you were to have that opportunity, Dick, to ask questions of Double D, what kind of questions would you ask him?
It would be to ask him what lessons he's learned from the mistakes they've made this season, what they're going to do to change that. Does he think the club's in the position to be what is one of the elite clubs in European football in the next 5 years? Because we've seen that that's a target. And really, what is the vision for the future here? Because we're all in the dark. We're still left here with no manager. I don't think John Kennedy will be the permanent manager. We're very close to Champions League qualifiers, which are crucial, and we want to wrestle the title back. So I think a vision and what mistakes have been made would be the first things I'd be asking Dermot Desmond.
I called him DD or Double D with my tongue firmly in my cheek because someone was having a go at me last week for calling Neil Lennon Lenny, and apparently you can only call him Lenny if you're his friend. So sorry about that. Dermot Desmond doesn't speak that often, JP, but it has come out. He's broken his silence. There was a few wee bits in there that I guess you could read between the lines, whereby he's talking about the way that Celtic do business. You know, they don't have to put everything out there as other clubs apparently do. But it does come. I was more looking at the timing of that, JP. Do you think that that's coming not as such on the eve of an announcement, but certainly in the lead up to an announcement? We're in an international break. There's 3 games to play. The final games involving Scotland will be next Wednesday. Are you expecting something this time next week to come out of Celtic Park around, first and foremost, the director of football?
Well, just there that second I thought of a musical analogy that will probably bring a bit of credibility back from the Ronan Keating. No offence, Declan. I don't have a problem with Ronan Keating, but yeah, you know that bit in the Beatles song "A Day in the Life," where there's that kind of huge orchestral build up, where it's like basically somebody's obviously conducting it and making it go completely wild in the studio, and then it just goes right up to a point and then stops, and then there's the woke up, got out of bed,
Aye. Well, dragged a comb across my head.
Yeah. Well, that noise, that concerto sort of building up, that feels like the point that we're at right now in terms of
I like
all
it.
the noise and everything just building up to a point where it's just going to go boom, and then there's an announcement, and that's where I feel we're at right now in terms of there's so much talk, there's so much rumour, there's so much chat. Dermot Desmond's interview, whatever you want to call it, has been thrown into the mix as well. Interestingly, when he talked about the sort of almost like the due diligence and the sort of how sort of intricate a process it is, but yet we were led to believe that it was such a throwaway appointment of Neil Lennon in the showers. So, like, I don't know. I'd like to think that they are doing a diligent process with regards to the manager, and his interview has just been thrown in to sort of add weight to, well, we are actually doing something, by the way. We're not just sitting here in our hands. So we'll wait with bated breath. But surely that announcement is, whatever it is going to be, the announcement surely has to be imminent, because we're a ship without a rudder. Yeah,
we are. I mean, looking at a few things that you mentioned there, JP, brilliant analogy with the Beatles. I had that song ringing in my head just as you spoke about it. 1967, that album came out as well, didn't it?
Amazing, eh?
Yeah, I know, what a year.
Masterpiece.
Yeah, absolutely. But when I'm looking at the lines of communication and the fact that not that long ago, it was on a Thursday because it was you two that we had this discussion with, we spoke about the Harkin Maresca setup, whereby there's two figures at Manchester City who know how the other works. And JP, I don't think you were convinced at the beginning of the conversation that something like that would work. By the end of it, you could see the logic in setting up the football department in such a way. Since then, I've seen a lot of kind of feedback on social media, particularly where people are saying, we can't appoint, and in actual fact, our very own Anthony Haggerty had this same view. We can't appoint someone who has only had under 23 experience. Absolutely. Totally agree with Tony in that respect. But you could see the thinking behind such a move, not particularly with Maresca in place there. So in relation to the tweet that went out last night, which obviously gathered some momentum, it was on the back of a lot of what was said around the Roy Keane at the top of this week on a Celtic State of Mind. It must have been Tuesday, because I am only on it on a Tuesday and a Thursday these days. And there was reaction on a fans forum. Who knew that you still had fans forums? I thought they were something from a bygone age, along with Bebo and MySpace. But yes, fans forums. There was a reaction to basically say that you've never got a single thing right yet. Well, that's not what we try to do on Axom, is it? We're not here. We're not called Celtic Rumours. We're not called In the Know. We don't try and do that. What we try and do is discuss all matters relating to Celtic within the last 24 hours, and that's why it's called the Bulletin. But what I would say, and I'm saying this before we came on, is that through, I guess, the podcast mainly, but through some of the other endeavours that are Celtic related, I must get 12, 15 different bits of information every single week in relation to comings and goings and what's happened at Celtic and what the team line's going to be, etc., etc. And I don't really go with it. Now and again, I will share it with the WhatsApp group, Declan, of which you're part of. JP refuses to be part of the madness, and I don't blame you, JP, at this moment in time. But what I'll often do is drop some of these things into the WhatsApp group just to test the opinion. Many of them come to fruition and were true and correct pieces of information, and others were just nonsense that everybody else gets on WhatsApp groups, etc. But this information I found extremely interesting because of the individual that it comes from, and it's not about trying to shout from the rooftops, we're in the know. What do you get from a tweet? What am I going to gain from putting out a tweet? Absolutely nothing, really. So this information has come through before Nicky Butt made his announcement yesterday, or before Manchester United made the announcement for him, saying that he wants to explore new challenges. So remove the name Maresca. I think this is the way I was trying to explain it, Deck, to the rest of the group. Remove the name Maresca and replace it with Butt. So that setup, that structure that we've already spoken about, what you've got to try and do is establish first and foremost, I guess, JP, what is the director of football's role, and what would Maresca's role have been? What would that head coach, if you like, what's their role? Because Roy Keane's not a head coach, he's a manager, isn't he? So if someone like Nicky Butt was to come in alongside Roy Keane, what would their role be? I mean, I'm going to come to you first of all. Let's differentiate the roles, Declan, because only then can you say, would Harkin fit that role? Would Nicky Butt fit that role? So first of all, director of football, what's his role?
To me, it's to direct traffic and bring in players and be that go-between Dominic McCann, whoever's the first team coach. And it's also to implement a style of football that we want to play. That would be, to me, what a director of football does. He needs to be that stopgap, that it's not the chief executive making all the decisions, that if the head coach wants players, he's a man that can go and get them, and he implements a style of football that if the head coach then departs the club, that head coach can be replaced by somebody and the philosophy is still in place.
I agree with that. You use the word philosophy. I think that comes into the style of play as well, Declan. Recruitment, JP, would be a massive part of that. I would also think that the director of football will be looking at the full football structure from top to bottom, right down to the structural aspect of youth development, but also they're going to have to look at scouting as part of the recruitment as well, because the recruitment obviously is first team right down to youth players. So in terms of that, I think one of the most important things you said, Dick, is that is in place, and that's, you would hope that managers would be a long-term view, but certainly the director of football is a long-term view, whereby if the manager or coach were to leave, you can slot someone else back in, but the whole operation continues as is. Is that how you understand it yourself, JP?
I mean, certainly, yeah. From my very limited knowledge of directors of football and the setups in other clubs, yeah, that's what I would think. But just to add to what Declan said about what I would expect his role to be, it would be again to have a map for players, like a plan for players who come in, and and it be an established plan. Whether it's this is where we see you in 2-3 years. How long is your idea of being at the club? How long do you see yourself being here? And just get all those things established as well. Like the same with regards to players going out on loan, so that there's no grey area, because we saw that one of the biggest things I think that impacted this season was the absolute mismanagement of players' futures last summer, where it was like, oh, well, let's just stay for another year, I don't know how they worked it or how they worded it to the players, if it was the whole, selling them the 10 in a row thing, which is so short term, it's unbelievable. Because it's just another season. Yes, it was a historic season, but it's another season. And in those players' lives, that maybe didn't mean as much to them as it clearly does to us. So having that sort of thing established and getting all of that completely, ticked off and watertight, just allowing so there's working hand in hand with the manager, so that he knows what sort of shelf life he's got for these players.
The big thing with that as well, I guess, that a lot of those decisions were being made by Peter Lawwell previously, and we've heard again. Yep. And we've heard just recently, and again, the information had been filtering through from the touts, from the sources, from these in-the-know people for some time, that Neil Lennon was against the idea of keeping players who didn't want to be at the club, or the people that downed tools should have been shot, not physically shot, but shot of. You should have got shot of them before anybody accuses me of saying they should have been shot earlier, and obviously many of those players are still at the club as we speak. So the director of football, again, a big concern for me would be that whole situation where, who do they work with? Are they going to have, is the manager going to be happy with the director of football being foisted upon them? The director of football, you would think, would have some kind of say alongside this has been confirmed by Dermot Desmond, the process obviously involves Peter Lawwell and the incoming Dominic Mackay in relation to the new staff coming in. And, you know, you would hope that the Director of Football would have some kind of relationship, some kind of working relationship with the staff who are going to be working as a manager, head coach, assistant manager on the football side of things. Declan, so I guess what we would then say is that the front runner seems to be Fergal Harkin. Manchester City has also worked at Nike football, so would you expect maybe once the international games are over this time next week that we might be getting some kind of announcement on that level, the Director of Football?
I think so. I think that appointment is key, and it's one that, you know, when you're reading about it in the press, it seems as if it's ever more closer. There's been a lot of links with him in Manchester City. As we've spoken on here before, there's links already in place between Celtic and Manchester City. So I think, I would hope anyway, that after the international break that is done, because he's going to be a real key figure. If it isn't Fergal Harkin, whoever it is, you need to be in the door early, because this is the guy that's going to need to sort out a squad that is going to be decimated with players leaving, and is going to need to find new targets in what is a very hard post-Brexit and still a pandemic environment of a transfer market.
Before we get into the other two names, Declan, of the three on the bottom of the screen here, which are you comfortable with? Because I'm going to bring up a few comments. As you can imagine, the comments are coming in thick and fast. Of the three, how many of those are you actually comfortable with?
Definitely Fergal Harkin. Now, Nicky Butt, people will have different opinions of him, but at Manchester United, he's brought through Marcus Rashford, Mason Greenwood, Scott McTominay, Alec Twanzebe and Dean Henderson, so he's got a decent enough track record of bringing players through from the Manchester United Youth Academy into the first team. Whether he would be suited at Celtic, though, I don't know. But Roy Keane, I don't know how comfortable I am with that. It just seems as if we're appointing a name rather than a vision. But certainly Fergal Harkin, I don't certainly think Nicky Butt's a bad coach. I know he's got his UEFA Pro licence and whatnot, so probably Harkin and Butt, but big question mark alongside Roy Keane.
What about yourself, JP? Before I go to the comments, what's your thoughts if you look at those three names at the bottom of the screen?
Well, I think probably now's an opportune moment to bring up one of my Facebook memories. On this day, 25th of March 2010, my Facebook status update was, really hope all this Paul Lambert chat is hearsay. He is most definitely not the right man for the job. When are folk going to stop touting ex-players as managers? I'd take Mark Hughes over any of them.
So you started it?
I started it, yeah. You've just picked up the baton and ran with the Mark Hughes baton, but that was obviously just after Tony Mowbray had been relieved of his duties, and I was saying, why is it that we have to have this sort of Celtic Irish, former player connection, and why can we not move away from that? It just seems like that's the only thing that we can go with. But I mean, Nicky Butt, I didn't actually know Nicky Butt could be attributed to the successes of those players you just mentioned, Declan. So that obviously is in his favour. My love for Manchester United is well documented. Nicky Butt, absolute hero. Roy Keane, absolute hero. I said it the other week when we spoke about him. However, with regards to this appointment, I'm so wary of it. So wary. And I know Russell's been the sort of positivity troll on Twitter in the last 24 hours, like sending out positive vibes about the appointment. But I really just don't know. I mean, we've spoken about his credentials and what he's done in the last 10 years and what he's not done in the last 10 years, and that terrifies me. Yeah, great pundit, great player, and seemingly actually a nice guy. I think a lot of the punditry persona is put on. People do say a lot of good things about Roy Keane as a person. He's not a complete maniac, but I just look at this and I think we're at a position where we cannot make a mistake. This Celtic board, whoever makes the decision, cannot make a mistake here, and they cannot make two mistakes in a row. And the idea of Roy Keane leaving Celtic under a cloud and with it not have been a success, absolutely, it was bad enough as a player the Clyde debut and all that was horrendous. I was there. It was horrible. Seeing your hero from Man United playing in a Celtic strip and getting beat off Clyde was a low point in my Celtic supporting career. So take that up on a notch on the managerial level. I've just watched Neil Lennon leave Celtic supposedly as a failure despite his achievements in the past. I don't want to see the same thing happen with Roy Keane. So whoever's making that decision, they need to be 150%, right on it.
I'm going to bring up some of these comments because it's going to be a busy day of comments, and I want as many Celtic fans to have their say from Twitter, Facebook and also YouTube. And if you are watching like Lloyd Jepson on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, because we have leapfrogged Aberdeen FC in terms of YouTube subscribers, and our next target is Hibs. So the thought of Roy Keane as Celtic manager is giving me the fear, says Lloyd. And by the way, I've seen loads of comments just like that. Coming in, JD on YouTube, when I read your tweet last night about Keane, I had to check the calendar to see if it was April the 1st. Had a few people saying that. And Gary Fairweather, please no. Now, Stuart Bonner, I'm glad you made this point. I'm glad you've said this. Every outlet running with this from your tweet, Paul, aimed at the KDS naysayers. So do you know something, or is it much ado about nothing? Well, what I would say, Stuart, and to anyone who, basically writes off anything that anybody says on a podcast, because nobody knows what's happening other than a select few within the club, is, like I was saying to JP and Declan before, we get fed loads and loads of information. 12, 15 stories every single week, but we're not in the habit of putting them out there unless you think that there is some kind of weight behind them. So you weigh it up, don't you? You look at the person that's giving you the information. You look at the information that they've given you before. I don't want to get into the logistics of source handling and intelligence management and all that kind of stuff, but that all comes into it, doesn't it? You're not going to put something out that you've been forwarded on a WhatsApp group and all that kind of stuff. But if it comes directly from someone and you go back to them and ask them a few questions, and then something like part of that team that you've been given becomes available unusually, and it was a surprise to everybody, I think, in terms of Manchester United, then that adds even more weight to what you've already been told. So much ado about nothing. I said last night on Twitter, I would rather it was, to be honest, much ado about nothing. I would rather be wrong about, well, it's not even me, I put it out there, it wasn't my information, but I would rather this wasn't the direction the club were taking. But JP's made a good point. Russell has been Mr. Positivity about this, and I can see why. I can see what he's trying to do, because it does make sense. So we've already spoken about a director of football, what it is he's bringing to the table. What I would then say is the Maresca stroke Butt appointment would be, I reckon, very, very similar in relation to the position that they would hold at Celtic if it was Maresca or Butt. So what would they be bringing to the table? What would their responsibilities be under a regime, Declan, where you've got a figure like Keane, obviously as the manager?
I think the worry still, Paul, is in terms of the youth academy, the personnel that isn't bringing as much as we would like will still be in place with Chris McCartney and other guys down the line, and that's a worry that there's no direct pathway into the first team just now at Celtic, which is another part that I think the club really need to look at and change. If John Kennedy is to stay about the place, I would actually like to see John get that job as head of youth, because I think that would suit him well. But it would be, to get the best out of players that are there that we know have underperformed this season. And again, modern coaching techniques that, for instance, this season, not even modern coaching techniques, the basics of defending a set piece. How many times this season are we going to concede for a set piece? And we hear John Kennedy after the game on Sunday come out and say, it's not something I want to dwell on. Well, why not? We've conceded over, I think, enough 50% of our goals this season from set pieces. So it'd hard to work on the training ground and try and make that pathway for younger players to get into the first team and develop our own players again, because we're not doing that. And it's something that as a club Celtic are going to need to do, because we don't have the ability to go out and buy £20 million players. We need to look from within, especially in the current market.
Yeah, I think most of those points, Declan, is what I would be looking for, your player development because obviously we're going to lose quite a number of players over the next few months. Youth progression is massive. It's been overlooked for too long at Celtic. When it comes into the actual coaching side of it, it's no real shock that a lot of the time in a setup like this, the manager doesn't do a lot of the coaching. I mean, Martin O'Neill didn't do much of the coaching. He didn't speak to players all that much in relation to tactics. This is kind of things that had been discussed all week and worked on all week with people like John Robertson, Steve Walford. So, if you've got a figurehead, if you like Keane, Roy Keane, and he's your figurehead, and there's a trusted second in command, even with another coach alongside them, dealing with everything that you've said there, Declan, and working on, implementing the philosophy that's coming from above, if you like, but also looking at, the sports science element of it, and there's other staff members who would be assisting with that, data analysis, coaching, tactics. JP, I guess what I'm saying is going down what Russell's been saying over the last 24 hours. If you remove the Roy Keane and the view that we have of him being a divisive character, a dinosaur, out of touch, an unsuccessful manager, all of these things that we've seen cropping up, and a lot of people believe that to be the case, could it still work? I guess is my question to you, JP.
Well, I mean, let's just say I was willing to get on board with this plan. Like all three of those names, let's say I was willing to get on board with it. Because, I mean, ultimately I would. If in 2 weeks' time, if Roy Keane is paraded as Celtic manager, I will support it and I will support him. And I will renew my season ticket and all the rest of it. That's going to happen anyway, regardless of the manager. I'm not going to just go, no, I don't want to be involved with this because I don't necessarily 100% agree with it. But the key thing is, for me anyway, is that if all three of those people have a relationship, then fine. But if someone's trying to play Cilla Black at Celtic again and tie people up, here, meet so-and-so, this is your new manager, meet so-and-so, this is your new assistant coach, that can... I nearly swore there, but honestly, I don't get that upset that much at the moment about football, but that whole idea can get to if that is how they're going to look at it. Because if Roy Keane hasn't met Fergal Harkin, if Nicky Butt hasn't met Fergal Harkin, if there's not a relationship between those three people, then this idea is flawed from the very start. No matter what implementations they want to put in place, it just doesn't fill me with hope. And that's from that point of view. Never mind what they actually do going forward. I just think if there is a relationship there, then great. Then I would obviously be more willing to sort of embrace it in a way, because, like you said, the theory behind it potentially could work. And I spoke to somebody this morning who has a fondness for Roy Keane, based more on his looks and his punditry rather than anything else. But she said that she would be behind this appointment and said that it's what Celtic needs.
Well, one of the big things, and I think we didn't touch on this on Tuesday. We've been speaking all season about the indiscipline, if you like, at Celtic Park. And by indiscipline, I mean, the culture that had crept in at Celtic, whereby you've got a striker who was a massive part of success, or the turnaround, if you want, last season in Lee Griffiths, still not being fit, and we're moving into the end of March. I mean, that's unacceptable. Bolingoli thinking it's okay to jump on a plane and go to Spain. And we could go on and on and on. There's been so many different examples of that, small examples like players on their phones. Never really got my knickers in a twist about that. But there's been quite a few examples of this indiscipline. And also, I mean, you could probably bring in the standards in terms of the fitness. We've spoken about the fitness, the amount of goals we lose, not only from set pieces, Deck, but later on in games, post 70 minutes, we're always good to lose a goal. Something that Celtic always were renowned for, scoring goals, not letting them in. But we've allowed that to creep in. So I've seen a lot of people, kind of looking at similarities between Neil Lennon and Roy Keane, but I actually don't really buy into that, because I don't think that would be allowed to happen under the stewardship of Roy Keane. And by the way, I'm not sitting here shouting that I think Roy Keane should be the Celtic manager. I'm trying to wait up for if and when that day comes where we're sitting here next Thursday actually talking about an appointment. But it is a point that's been brought up quite a bit. ASM1 on YouTube, Keane's personality probably won't work. He's Lennon times 50. I think my concern in that in relation to that point would be that whether or not his style of management would appeal to the modern footballer. Now, some would say Roy Keane was a modern footballer, but even in the 10 years that he's been away from managing, and we know that he's been involved in the game as an assistant, but even in those 10 years, has football evolved so much? Has it come forward? Some would say it's not forward at all. So much, Declan, that the modern player wouldn't respond to the approach that Roy Keane has. I think that's people's biggest concern. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, we keep using the example, going back to that jersey that's hanging over JP's shoulder there, the 3-3 game against Kelly. In the changing room there, if Neil Lennon screams and shouts at Tony Stokes will go out and score 2 goals for you in the second half, as he did that day. If Neil Lennon does that to Eddie will down tools and swagger about the pitch for the second half. That's the kind of mentality that I believe would be a barrier if Roy Keane was to come back into a dressing room as the manager. What's your thoughts on that, Declan?
I think certainly with the transfer market changing, Celtic will look to buy British and Irish based players. That might build into this idea with Roy Keane that he'll go for those type of players and not as stylish an individuals you'd maybe see as shopping in the market for French under 21 players. But I've been watching the Spurs documentary on Amazon Prime. Don't know if any of the two of you have watched it. And when Mourinho comes in at Spurs, he tells Christian Eriksen right away, you're not playing, and keeps him on the bench for the foreseeable. And that was a major first-team player. Christian Eriksen's made most amount of assists for Spurs in the Premier League. That was an issue that Neil Lennon had, where we had a group of players that had set in, a rot set in, and we didn't get rid of them. I don't think that would happen under Roy Keane. I think if pros weren't up for playing for him, he would have put them in the stand and said either you're going to play for me or sit there and I won't play you. Whereas I don't think Neil put the foot down hard enough for that. Now, that isn't an advocate of Roy Keane, but I think there's stuff that we saw this season that Keane wouldn't have allowed. But in terms of players responding, Keane is certainly a big name. You saw Gerrard attract players because he wanted to play under Gerrard as a name. I'm not trying to be an advocate of Roy Keane, but if we are going to shop for British and Irish-based players, this could be in the thinking of the Celtic board.
What about yourself, JP? Russell Boyce can't wait for the announcement. What about yourself? Has football moved on? I mean, it's not as though he's not been involved. I mean, he has coached and he's been the assistant manager to the modern player. I think that it's just so raw in the minds of Celtic fans as to how it went spectacularly wrong this season, and a lot of the reasons behind that obviously were, these players not playing for the gaffer, if you like. And there's a fear, I think, amongst a lot of Celtic fans that the same thing will happen with Roy Keane. Do you believe that to be the case, or do you think that there are disciplines and there is a professionalism around Roy Keane that maybe wasn't present under Neil Lennon?
Well, I think you have to, like I said before, I think you have to maybe take his pundit persona with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but there's obviously an element of his own thoughts and feelings come into that. When you hear him speaking about, he's absolutely torn Paul Pogba apart at times, for the way that Paul Pogba, portrays himself, the whole image thing and, all about the bling and everything else. Keane doesn't stand for that. And if you read his book, he didn't stand for it at the time in the dressing room as well. He didn't have any time for folk that were dining out on past glories or, sort of being showy in the dressing room. He just didn't want any of that. So the modern football player is that times, 1,000 basically. So, but I know, I think I didn't see Martin O'Neill's comments about him, but I think Martin O'Neill said at the weekend that, Roy Keane had sort of learned a lot in the last 10 years or so, whether it's the experience of being an assistant, also with his TV punditry and everything else. So maybe he's struck a sort of happy medium with regards to that, with regards to how he deals with that. But I mean, you look at the Bolingoli incident. Roy Keane would have probably murdered Bolingoli, for doing that. I don't know what Neil Lennon's real reaction was to that happening, but yeah, Keane would have. It would have been nasty. I wouldn't have liked to see it actually, because I was raging with the guy myself, because that was one of the first, it
was
carpets to be pulled from under us, So that's my thoughts on Roy Keane.
No, you're right. It was one of the first rugs to be pulled from under our feet, and those two games, they just hung over us all season. And loads of people are saying, but it's all right if we win the 2 games in hand and we win the 3 games against it, and then it just unravelled slowly throughout the season, and it was actually painful to watch. Now, you've got to then question, Declan, about the modern footballer. You and I and JP, we're not in a dressing room, we're not on the training pitch, we just observe it like everybody else, and we observe the changes to football. And modern footballers don't give interviews to platforms. The people that we're speaking to in terms of ex-players are from maybe 15 years ago now, longer. So it is a different era. Is it moved too far forward so that a manager can't give somebody a roasting? Because it's a competitive game of football. It's not as though you're sitting in an office and there's a real culture within an office where you wouldn't go up and give someone a roasting because of their performance. But this is sport. This is like, you've got to have a winning mentality. Surely we can't get to the point where you're scared in case you upset someone from time to time. Surely there's a place in football for that.
I think there still is a place in football for that, and I think some of the bigger names in the Premier League probably still give players a roasting. As much as Pep Guardiola, I think, is probably the best coach in world football, he probably still shouts at people at times. Same goes for Mourinho or Ancelotti or whoever. There's a competitiveness. You expect players to respond at times to that. And again, there was a comment there from somebody. If it is Roy Keane to come in here, I'm not saying that's who I want to come in, it will be between him and Fergal Harkin that are picking the players to come to Celtic. And we know we're going to have a major overhaul, so they'll be coming in and knowing what to expect. So it's not as if he's just coming in to manage the 11 that are there, because majority of the 11 that are there are going to be out the door. So with that, there's bits of this jigsaw puzzle that just keep sticking together and make me more worried that we're going to be turning up to Celtic Park next season with half and half Celtic Man United scarves singing the Soldiers song.
Half and half scarves. Stop right there. Jungle Lion.
Actually, by the way, Declan, from Ryan Giggs' testimonial.
Oh, I remember that, yeah. Jungle Lion, regular contributor on Axel. Welcome back to the show. You're commenting on Periscope. If the director of football picks a player and Keane says no, who wins that battle? I guess that comes back to the point you made earlier, JP, with regards to there has to be that team with regards to the whole operation. It can't be that you just throw a group of people like Cilla Black, like you say. I mean, that reference probably went over Declan's nearly shorn head. You remember that?
I got
Blind date, yep. Back in less complicated times back then, JP, yeah, blind date. Wow. So you're right. There has to be a cohesion. There has to be a dynamic team. If you're going to be building a structure and a philosophy, and obviously you're bringing in players that will then be implemented into a team that's been picked by Roy Keane. I wouldn't, in fact, I know who would win the battle, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, the director of football will have superiority over the manager. But we don't want to get into a situation again, do we, where we've spent £10 million on a centre half and a left back, and we're going to our European qualification games and they're sitting on the bench. You don't want to be in a situation where a £5 million Greek goalkeeper comes in and plays a handful of games. Now, some of that was due to the fact that he hasn't settled at Celtic or in Scotland, and he hasn't set the heller alight, but he wasn't Lenny's pick. And we know that now. So we don't want to be in that situation whereby someone else is picking the players and you've then got a bloated squad of players that you don't believe in. Surely you would think when we talk about the actual recruitment of the manager, that is something that we're already in discussions with between Dominic Mackay, Peter Lawwell, and you would guess the director of football is already part of that.
Yeah, and also you don't want a situation where you've got your most successful manager successful domestic manager since Jock Stein telling you, I've got about 1 million wingers I don't want this one. But it was essentially what he was saying about Shved. And then there was Arzani as well, and it was just like no one in the Celtic support wants to see that kind of sort of meddling and muddle of recruitment, because it just has a knock-on effect further down the line. For every player that we don't sign that the manager wants, that's creating a problem further down the road, where we end up with playing Beaton at centre half, or having to bring Welsh in after a loan spell at Greenock Morton. Do you know what I mean? To play in big games, like all of that, all knocks further down the road. It's all very well when you've got your first 11 fit, but as soon as one of them gets injured and you've not got an adequate replacement to go in, because you've been spending money willy-nilly on loads of wingers, or strikers that come with all this gusto and hullabaloo, like Bio's done nothing for Celtic, and then there was a big announcement at Celtic Park, and we were all in pitch black and the lights were on him, and it was like we were signing Ronaldo or something like that, and it's like, well, the guy's away, he's on loan elsewhere, and he's barely done anything for us, so.
Interesting enough, the guys on the Scream of Celica on a Tuesday night were talking about some of the strikers we'd brought in over the years, JP, and it's fresh in the memory because they also spoke about that 3-3 game against Kilmarnock, where we wore that kit over your shoulder, which wasn't one of my favourites, I've got to say. It takes me back to my ZX Spectrum loading days.
I've got that up because a guy Brian McDonald asked on Twitter last night what our thoughts were on that strip, and then I put a picture up with me wearing it, and he was like, if you hang that up on Axom tomorrow, I'll donate money to charity of your choice. So there it is. Aye, so and it's an easy way to make money for charity if that's all I need to do is hang a strip.
Aye. Absolutely, but the thing is, well, talking about strips, and it's a relevant point. You'll know how immersed in Celtic match-worn jerseys I've been now for over 5 years in relation to doing all the research and all the study around the history of the Celtic jersey, which will be coming out in the form of a book eventually. Because obviously the publishers have been very patient in that process. But when you're looking at Celtic jerseys, that's the kind of thing that we would normally talk about on this podcast. There's been a leaked Celtic third kit. At this moment in time, I couldn't care less about things like that. I'm just so focused on the big decisions that have been made at Celtic that something that I'm passionate about just gets put to a side. I'll come back to that later on and have a look at it. But some brilliant comments coming in. Barry McCluskey, welcome to the show, Barry. You're responding to Paul Bosas, who's obviously commented earlier on Facebook. I thought about that last night. Harkin and Maresca are a team. You'd assume that Keane and Butt would work together. They've obviously played together. Could the two teams merge? That's interesting because even if we're looking at Harkin, Keane and Butt, I mean, it's not just a 3-man team. There's going to be other areas, and you've got to ask yourself, is Maresca part of this plan? Another comment that I seen yesterday was that, what might take the sting out of the Keane appointment would be if he comes along with Damien Duff. And then I started asking myself, is Damien Duff this mythical coach? I mean, where did that come? All of a sudden he's this brilliant coach that when he left everything fell to bits. Did that really happen? I'll come to you, Declan. I mean, does it take the sting out of it? And why? Damien Duff.
A lot of people seem to like Damien, well-quoted coach. And I think, the timing of his departure and how bad we then faltered, I think a lot of people have just connected those two things together. And he's then went on. I think where is he just now? Is he at an Irish team at this point in time? Damien Duff.
I think he's unemployed. I think he left his role in the Republic of Ireland set up because he was with Stephen Kenny, and then they didn't really explain why he'd left that role. Maybe it was family reasons or whatever, but I don't think he's taken up another job since. Because
I thought he'd went and did a bit of coaching at Shelburne or somewhere. But whatever he's been into, he's not really went on to do anything. As JP says there, the Ireland set up, he's left that too. So I don't know whether it would take the sting out of it. Possibly, as I said earlier, if Harkin's in the door, I'm quite happy, but it's all about a succession planning, and that's really what we need. We can't just have an old favourite coming in here and that's it. We need a structure that as I said earlier on, is a philosophy in place that if one person either fails or departs, they can be replaced very quickly.
That's what you want. You want the whole mechanics of this to continue regardless if one element is removed from it. But I don't know if you remember, JP, but part of the reason certainly that Damien Duff left the Irish setup was due to the motivational video that was shown to the Ireland players, and that was ahead of the England game. It was a friendly against England at Wembley, and part of that was around the 1916 Easter Rising, and this was used as a motivational video for the Ireland players before the England game. And seriously, whoever was responsible for doing that was seriously criticised by the Irish FA, and Damien Duff stood up to that because he felt there was absolutely no issue in showing Irish players Irish history, and that was certainly one of the reasons why he left. Another reason might have been that Ireland are absolutely dog meat at the moment. I mean, you watch them. Stephen Kenny, the big thing about that for me was Kenny obviously was the manager at Dunfermline. And around about, and I remember it. You would see him around Dunfermline, and I remember the aftermath of that when Dunfermline went into administration a few years after Kenny had left, obviously. And I spoke to a lot of the players who played under Kenny, and he talking about divisive characters, and this was for different reasons. He was very divisive. The players did not rate him at all as a coach and as a manager. He's gone away, obviously, back to Ireland and rebuilt his reputation. I then spoke to Paddy McCourt. I'm going to be accused of being a name dropper here, but Paddy McCourt spoke so highly of Stephen Kenny during their time at Derry City. So you've got the two ends of that. Next thing you know, he is, it was the under-21 boss first, wasn't it, Dec? And then he's obviously been promoted to the... But to be honest, I did think back to the Dunfermline days. I thought back to that period where, you got the club relegated, and I thought, I wasn't sure if that was going to work. It's obviously not working. I mean, that's another defeat last night. And during that, obviously beforehand I learned that Duffy had been dropped from the Republic of Ireland squad. So, things aren't getting any better for poor Duffy. But let's keep talking about the other Republic of Ireland legend, because let's be honest, that's exactly what Roy Keane is. And I had this discussion yesterday where I said, is he the most famous Irish footballer of all time? Potentially. You think about some of them: Paul McGrath, Liam Brady, Robbie Keane, Shay Given, Pat Bonner. But is Roy Keane the Republic of Ireland icon? And then I start thinking, well, we've been criticising those in power at Celtic for some time about them being out of touch with the Celtic fan base. And do they believe, Declan, I'll ask you first, do they believe that this is the high profile season ticket shifting manager that Celtic may require?
I think to the extent Dermot Desmond may think that, Paul. You put a text in earlier on and it made a bit of logical sense in terms of, the reach that Roy Keane's got, especially, as you mentioned, to Irish-American Celtic supporters in terms of a brand type manager here. We've also got the billing that he would get. Once again, we were using a hashtag one club since 1888, but again, inevitably, if he came up here, it would be billed as Keane versus Gerrard, like the old days, Manchester United and Liverpool. So I think Dermot Desmond probably does, from a branding perspective, believe that Roy Keane is the man.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, I understand from a business perspective, a marketing perspective, JP, that all these things need to be considered. Celtic certainly were not considering that when we appointed Ronnie Dyler, because there was no real... I mean, I remember a few Norwegians used to come to the games. That was about it. That's the only difference I've seen. But in terms of global reach, that certainly was not there. You look at some of the appointments that Dermot Desmond has had the final say in, has made even, you could say, and it's Martin O'Neill, Neil Lennon, Brendan Rodgers, Roy Keane. So there is a trend developing there, and I think it's for that very reason, Declan, where you want to appeal to the massive Irish diaspora all over the world, but particularly in the American market, JP. Is that the thought process? Let's get a director of football and a head coach who are so good at their job that the manager's actually just the figurehead in this whole operation, if that's indeed possible.
Well, I guess that could be their thinking, but with regards to how Roy Keane is viewed by the Irish support, the Irish people, I don't know what the sort of groundswell is, but if I take one person who I know, and it is one person, but he is a very, very Irish guy, one of the best guys I've ever met supporting Celtic. His name's Paddy Kelleher. If you're watching, Paddy, hello. And Paddy was on our supporters bus, the Heriot Watt bus, and he's just a great, vivacious character, passionate Irishman. He used to always sing a rendition of the Old Triangle on the bus, which like the whole bus would shut up and Paddy would stand up and sing the Old Triangle.
What was your song, JP, on the supporters bus?
That's not for this broadcast, but I saw him comment on Facebook on something to do with Keane a while ago. I don't know if it was a Keane skit from one of his halftime analysis things, but Paddy was, you could tell with the venom in his voice, he's still not happy about Roy Keane walking out on his country. Regardless of his reasons for doing it, and I know that a lot of people will say, well, he was disappointed with the standards or whatever, but ultimately he was still there to do a job, and they didn't do it. So I know that's just one person, like I say, and that's Paddy, but that might be reflective, from a lot of people. So you just don't know. And just to add something else in, and I would never want to gauge, the potential success of a Celtic manager over how many people turned up to see the unveiling of that manager, because ultimately I'm not really bothered about that. But it would be interesting if, pandemic was not here and Roy Keane was announced. It would be interesting to see what sort of level of support would turn up to show their support. Do you know what I mean?
It would be very interesting. I mean, where you're talking there about where obviously he had a massive falling out with Mick McCarthy, and it was all about standards, and it was the very thing that we have seen slipping at Celtic. And let's not forget, as David Kelly points out, that Lennon took the squad to Dubai for a piss-up. Attitude reflects leadership. This has been an absolute PR disaster this season for Celtic. Now, whose decision was it to go to Dubai? Neil Lennon says that he would take responsibility for it. He obviously didn't sign it off. I mean, he doesn't sign off, the manager doesn't sign off a trip to Dubai that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds in the January. He might have been behind it, but I would doubt that he signed something like that off. But that is the kind of standards that have slipped this season, JP. So on the one hand, you're looking at that maybe having soiled or sullied a lot of people's kind of views on Roy Keane from an Ireland perspective, when obviously that was kind of world news, wasn't it, where he thought the training facilities were substandard and the hotel facilities were substandard, and he spoke out, and loads of players had been saying exactly the same thing, but when it came to the crunch, they all kind of just looked at their boots, and it was Keane against the world. That's the kind of thing that I think people worry about. In relation to if there was the ability to go and see the unveiling of a new manager, Declan, and it was Roy Keane, would you be there?
I like Manchester United, Paul. I don't know. Depends what I was doing that day. Maybe. Was it in the East End of Glasgow? Maybe.
Maybe. It takes us back again. I mean, loads of these comments coming through. Roy Keane is the bookies' odds-on favourite. I've seen that. I mean, the odds plummeted yesterday, didn't they? And that is always interesting, but all that basically means is that there's a lot of bets going on to that. And I keep going back, talking about information and people claiming to be in the know. I got information about Brendan Rodgers. I think I told you this, JP, and I was at a gig that night to watch Steve Mason at Liquid Rooms. You were probably at it, JP, because nothing much gets past you in Scotland, the Scottish gig circuit.
He's just cancelled these King Biscuit Time gigs, which I'm gutted about, because they were going to be at Tuts, or the Glasgow one was going to be at Tuts, but he's decided to focus on new material that he's written since that gig, those tours were announced. So yeah, that's not happening. So no. Anyway.
I don't know the date. I might have had this discussion with you. I don't know the date, but we bumped into a couple of pals. It was me and my big brother. It was at the gig, and they were asking who is going to be Celtic's manager, and I think Why are you asking me? How am I meant to know? But I have had this tip-off, and the tip-off obviously was Brendan Rodgers. And I remember when I was given that, he was something like 33-1. I don't bet, so obviously I didn't put anything on it. And very, very quickly that materialised. And the next thing you know, there's 13,000 people at Celtic Park at least for the unveiling of Brendan Rodgers. Let's just say, Declan, I don't think it's going to be as popular as that particular day was, because what you were getting with Brendan Rodgers was the full package, weren't you? I mean, all the other staff members, I guess, as important as they were all part of the Brendan Rodgers machine. Whereas this is a completely different structure that we are now looking at, JP. I mean, when you look at Director of Football, some would say we've had a pseudo DOF for a number of years. But the last Director of Football I've had, please correct me if I'm wrong, was Kenny Dalglish. I think he was called a technical director. We're moving in a completely different direction, and you've got to maybe even question, would someone of the ego and the power and of a Brendan Rodgers even work under such a structure?
I don't think so. I think, well, you only need to see his comments in the latter part of his Celtic tenure to know that it was starting to bristle with him, that there was interference. And whether that interference was there at the start, I don't know, because like we've spoken about this before, when he first came in, he was signing players that were clearly his players. Toure, Sinclair, Dembele, he'd obviously identified, De Vries. They were all his players, but then that just seemed to sort of dilute over time to the point where he didn't even have a clue about the people that were coming in, and I just find that absolutely astonishing that you would allow that disconnect to happen. Whether it was because the powers that be thought that he didn't have his heart in it, or he wasn't there for the long term, they should have still have been signing players that he wanted in the club rather than just random folk that they've been told are half decent by a scout that they spoke to, for half an hour on the phone, because that's just what it seems like it was going on. So I don't think Brendan Rodgers would have accepted being introduced Cilla Black style into this setup. So if it is Roy Keane, I would not have thought for a second that Roy Keane doesn't know Fergal Harkin. If they're going to put them two together, I wouldn't have thought for a second that he's not got some sort of relationship with him. And I know it's obviously Manchester City, but the football circles, if they've met each other, they'll know each other. Do you know what I mean? It's not like it's just because it's Manchester City they wouldn't have a potential relationship.
The big thing on that point there, talking about players coming in under the manager's nose, and it could be down to certain relationships that people at the club have with the agent who's representing the player, etc. The one big thing I always think back to was that day that Kevin Graham and I were at the cup final, I think, against Motherwell. We were at it was the second treble cup final, right? The second treble cup final, and I don't take them for granted, by the way, but obviously you've got to go back in your mind, and obviously Aberdeen, Motherwell, Hearts, and we couldn't get a ticket for the game, and we ended up in a hospitality lounge. That's the only tickets that Kevin and I could get for that game, and we shared that lounge with Marvin Compere. And there he was standing there, and you're looking at him thinking, 60 minutes of football against Morton in the cup. So there's a player right there, JP, that for me completely shows you how that doesn't work. There's the proof there. You're paying at least £1 million plus whatever the wages were to bring him to Celtic Park, and he played 60 minutes of football. So the signs when we were winning trebles, it's easier to turn a blind eye to that, isn't it? I mean, I remember groups of guys going up for selfies with him and all that kind of stuff, because it was, there's Marvin Compere. It was a bit of a joke figure, that has just cost the club a couple of £1 million in transfer fee and wages. So even though we had that ultra professionalism and the football philosophy of Brendan Rodgers in the background, there was a lot of things not working properly at the club, and despite all of that, he was able to deliver unprecedented success. But we've seen what's happened since he's left, and I think what we do need is we need a clear out, and that clear out started. The director of football, I would expect, would be the next one to be named, and that what we've just discussed there is point one on Celtic State of Mind's bulletin agenda today. Is there anything else worth speaking about? I see that Benitez has made it known that his ambitions lie in English football. Now, the reason I think that's relevant as well, Declan, is that I think that there's a few other names, a few other potential candidates who are certainly bookie candidates who will feel exactly the same way. And I think Eddie Howe will be thinking the exact same way as that as well. And if any of the international managers that we have been linked to are looking to come to British football, I think England will be the destination for them also. So that then begs the question, we've basically going to try and get the best of the rest. Where are we just now? Where are we in your mind, Declan, in terms of give me your director of football and management team?
I certainly think Fergal Harkin for me is the man for that job, and I was quite sold on Enzo Maresca coming in from Manchester City. I know he's not had experience as a manager, but I thought he was a fresh face. He's got good vision. We're needing to sell a vision to a coach. His stock's high just now, and I thought that would have been the kind of option, a young person, young coach, very highly rated, to come in with the links between the two football clubs. But in terms of where we're at, Paul, I still think we're a big enough football club that can attract a decent enough manager. I think we've still got money there that can be used wisely, but we need to sell a vision to head coaches and to whoever's coming in, because the short-termness of 10 in a row has cost us dearly. That needs to change, and we need to plan for the future with a decent succession plan in place that every season we either qualify for the Champions League or, make a good attempt at it. Not this wait, buy a player after we get knocked out. We have a good go at it and again return to domestic dominance.
Now, JP, 11 years ago today, you wanted Mark Hughes as a manager. 11 years on, where are you? Where's your head at when it comes to the director of football management team?
Well, yeah, I think. I mean, I don't know so much about Fergal Harkin, but the sheer fact that he was an employee of Manchester City, and I didn't know that about Nike. You mentioned that as well. It says to me that Manchester City are no mugs. They're not hiring imbeciles. They'll be hiring the best people for their positions right throughout the club, from top to bottom. So if we can take a cog out of their machine and put it at the top of ours to get it going, and then I think, and with regards to attracting managers, I think we need to get our house in order first and lay foundations that make it more of an attractive place to come for a Jesse Marsh or whoever in the future, because there's no doubt about it, if things if the stars align at a certain point in time, like it did with Brendan Rodgers, we could find ourselves being able to offer Jesse Marsh a job at some point in the future. And he's young enough to go away, do more things, manage in Germany or whatever, and then maybe come to us to take over a slick running outfit rather than the absolute ground zero that it is right now.
You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on there. And I'm going to leave the last kind of comment to David Kelly, who on YouTube, mind Rodgers took his laddie on a pre-season tour. Jobs for the boys has been an issue for a long time at Celtic. I just think back, I remember St Johnstone winning the cup there, and it was Jamie McCart. There was a picture of Jamie McCart with the cup, a guy who was so highly rated at Celtic as a youth player. And I did think when I saw Anton Rodgers, was he really named after Anton Rogan? Anton Rodgers in the Celtic jersey in that pre-season friendly. What must the youth players have thought? There's a guy there, Jamie McCart, didn't get a look in at Celtic, and he's gone on to some success, and fair play to the boy. But what must the youth players have thought when Anton Rodgers ran on the field that day and even went on the pre-season tour? Bizarre. That was one of the most bizarre moments. That is up there with the signing of Marvin Compere during the Brendan Rodgers years. Now, it's been an absolute pleasure, and yes, we will see if this develops. And as I said before, happy to be proved wrong. A tweet's a tweet and all that, and we'll see what happens with that last night. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for getting involved via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. All that's left for me to say is Declan McConville and JP Mason, thank you again for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind, guys.